أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يشري نفسه ابتغاء مرضات الله والله رؤوف بالعباد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight I would just like to take a brief pause from our discussion of our conversations with Allah as we can learn from the Quran to talk about the personality of our first Imam, the successor of our noble Prophet of Islam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Salawat. It is one of the honors that Allah has given to those who have chosen to follow Ahlul Bayt, to be able to know and to familiarize ourselves with the character and the life story of Amir al-Mu'mineen. It is a matter of great pride for the followers of Ahlul Bayt to be able to say that in addition to the Quran, we have an entire heritage of words and sayings and letters and sermons, and then the life story and the example of Amir al-Mu'mineen and his successors to guide our own lives. I mentioned yesterday that in the Quran, some of the prayers that we ask Allah, they are to give us consistency and a constancy in our lives. And that consistency and that constancy, it can really only come if we have models within our life of how to fulfill all of the different and sometimes conflicting roles that we have to fulfill. Because as human beings, we do have roles that overlap, and we do have roles that sometimes conflict. And it isn't sufficient for us simply to look at a book or look at a set of teachings to understand how to bring those together. But it is through the examples that we have of the Prophet and his infallible successors that we are able to bring those teachings together. Let me give you an example. We say, for example, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman. He is merciful. And his mercy is such that Rahmatuhu wasi'at kulla shay. His mercy encompasses all things. It encompasses even his punishment. It encompasses even his trials, even the hardships that we face. When I get sick, if there is an earthquake, even that is part of Allah's rahmah, which is wasi'ah, which encompasses all things. His ghadab and his anger, that is particular. But it is encompassed under the umbrella of Allah's system of mercy. The question, though, is what can that mercy mean for me aside from being a concept within my head? When it comes to Allah's being Rahman and having a universal mercy, I can understand the concept, meaning to love, to show kindness. But when it comes to a particular, I will not know what that means. Because if it is a mercy that allows such major tragedies to take place in the world, battles, earthquakes, tsunamis, all of these major challenges, then I'm left with the question, well, what does mercy mean for me? Will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help me overcome this problem that I face? A loved one is sick. Can I pray to a merciful God? What does that mercy mean when 100,000 people were just killed in some natural disaster or some man-made disaster somewhere else in the world? The mercy, it cannot have that tangible meaning aside from being a concept. Now, it is still mercy, even if it is just a concept that we can't relate to. But in order for Allah to make it something that we can relate to and that we can understand, Allah has said that I have placed that perfect manifestation of my mercy in the person of the Prophet. And I have sent him as rahmat lil alameen, as a mercy for the entire world. So my mercy, which is universal, that will be perfectly manifested in the person of the Prophet. And so now that universal mercy, it has become in a level and in a human dimension that we can relate to. Because if I have a prayer to make to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if I have a need, a haja, then I know what the reaction or the feeling of a merciful human being or an infinitely merciful prophet would be to that. And through that I can understand how Allah's mercy may operate. Even though I can't understand those masalih and mafasid, the greater interests of the universe as a whole, that may allow many things to take place in the world that I cannot understand and that I cannot relate to. But when it comes down to the human level, it is through the manifestation of Allah's mercy in the Prophet that I can relate to His mercy. And therefore I can approach Allah through the Prophet and through those who are a manifestation of Allah's mercy and His other names. And so if we call the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam Babullahi alladhi minhu yu'ta, the gate of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through which He is approached. The gate of Allah through which He is approached. That is one of the ranks of our Prophet and his progeny. That is not shirk by any means. In fact, it is our greatest insurance policy against shirk and ilhad. It is our greatest insurance policy against either ascribing partners to Allah and giving Him a human dimension, or not being able to understand and relate to Allah and then moving Him away from us to a point that He is something beyond our horizon. Because the essence of Allah, the reality of Allah, the way that He makes decisions for the world and even for our own well-being, the level of His knowledge and His actions is so beyond our comprehension that we can't understand what His mercy might mean for me. Does it mean that when my son or daughter is sick, that I can pray for their being well and Allah will make them well? Or will He cause them to suffer an unspeakable sickness? Is that better for me on some level? It may be better for me on some level, and I can understand that intellectually, but I can't relate to it. And so if we only can understand Allah in terms of His attributes on that level, we will never be able to relate to Him and sincerely approach Him and pray to Him. And so this is why we see that in many ahadith, and these are reported by not just one group or subset of Muslims, but by all Muslims. The Prophet, he is described as somebody who is manifesting the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran itself says that He is a mercy for all the world and for all the universe. And the other attributes of Allah are also manifested through Him. After the Prophet, those attributes, they were manifested through Ahlul Bayt. And so in this way we can see that it is by seeing how Allah's infinite attributes are to be manifested on the worldly level, on the human level, that we can relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what allows us to maintain the pristine concept of Islamic Tawheed. Allah is infinite. His attributes, they have meaning. There is no ta'til, there is no sense that, well, mercy is something that we can't understand, and forgiveness is something that we can't understand. They have a true meaning. But how we can relate to those attributes is through their manifestation, through those who are perfect role models for humanity. That is the role of Ahlul Bayt, and that is why turning towards them for guidance, for inspiration, for leadership, for an understanding of Islamic laws and ethics and practice, and also as interceders between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as intermediaries to have our needs fulfilled by Allah, this is what solidifies and strengthens our tawheed. So tonight is one of those nights when we can speak of and think of one of the members of Ahlul Bayt, and the greatest of the members of Ahlul Bayt, the one whom all of our Imams, with their own level of perfection and their own level of divine grace, would revere and would remember. Once a person came to our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, and said, Assalamu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. And the Imam paused, and his expression on his face changed. And he said, what did you say? Amir al-Mu'mineen is a title that is only appropriate for the one who was appointed directly by the Prophet and who was made the leader of the believers by the Prophet. Amir al-Mu'mineen is only one. All of us are Imams, and we have many ahadith. Kulluna Mahdi, wa kulluna qa'im bil haqq. All of us are Mahdi. All of us are qa'im bil haqq. All of us are divinely appointed leaders. All of us are a wasi, because we are either the wasi of the Prophet or the wasi of the previous wasi. So all of us have that trust, and we are the legatees, the trustees of the Prophet. But as for Amir al-Mu'mineen, there is only one Amir al-Mu'mineen, who is Al-Faruq al-A'zam, As-Siddiq al-Akbar. He has those unique titles even among the Imams, because he has a unique status. So let's talk a little bit about who Amir al-Mu'mineen was and what he should represent for us. Now, there are many aspects of Amir al-Mu'mineen's life that we speak of frequently, and I don't want to repeat that which we may have heard before, but to look at some of the unique aspects of the Imam's character, and of course Imam Ilahi's continuing commentary of the Imam's legacy to his son Hasan that is also going to be with us as well, and we will continue to benefit from it. One of the things that we find from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam is that he was able to maintain an Islamic ideal of balance in circumstances where everyone around him, even those who were very pious believers and even those who had a great deal of experience and sincerity, were unable to understand where the right course was and where the proper balanced course of action was. One of those instances was when the fitna, the sedition of the Khawarij took place. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says in one of his sermons, that if it were not for me, no one would know how to deal with the Khawarij after the Prophet. Here are people who pray and fast, and the way they pray, it would make all the other Muslims, even the sincere believers, green with envy. They stay up all night. They have the signs on their bodies of having engaged in long prostration and long ruku' and sujood. They recite Quran day in and day out, but it is as if Islam has gone through their being and not tarried, not stopped within them. Just as an arrow might pass through its target and not remain in its target. And so they have no knowledge of Islam except for the superficial aspect. People would not know how to deal with those people. They would think that, well, this is spiritual. This is a sign of a true Muslim. The Imam says, it was I who told people how it is to deal with them, how to combat them and eliminate their sedition and the harm to the Muslim Ummah that would come from them without going overboard, without creating a long-lasting division within the Islamic world. So it is that balance. It is that understanding of how to deal with external enemies and ignorant friends and all of the other differences and divergences that exist within and outside of the Islamic Ummah that we turn to Amir al-Mu'mineen for inspiration with. And I would just like to narrate a few incidents from the Imam's life in this regard. It will provide us inspiration, inshallah, through the differences that we face within our community, within the community of the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wasalam, within our broader Muslim community, and also with humanity as a whole. In order to prepare, please recite one salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the beginning of the Imam's struggle in Kufa, it is said that the Imam, he would give sermons and he would ask people what their opinion was as to how they should now confront Muawiyah, who had raised the flag of rebellion from Syria and made all sorts of false allegations from which the Imam was absolutely free of any guilt. The most free person from any guilt in the entire Ummah was Amir al-Mu'mineen in regard to what had happened in the days of the third caliph. However, Muawiyah, he raised the flag of sedition. The Imam was seeking the opinions of those around him in Kufa. Many people, they stood up and they said, "Oh Imam, we think that this is the right course of action, but نحن سلم لسلمكم وحرب لحربكم." We are peaceful to whoever you make peace with. We are going to go at war with whoever you go to war to. We give our opinions because you asked us, but we will follow you. One person stood up and said, "Do you think that you're going to take us to fight Muawiyah as you took us to fight the people of Jamal before? This will never happen. We will not do so." And then he said some things that were unworthy with regard to the rank and the nobility of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now, in that environment in Kufa, where people knew what had happened, and just in their neighborhood in Basra, a few hundred kilometers to the south, the treachery that had taken place and the harm that had come to the unity of the Islamic Ummah. And they knew what Muawiyah was planning in Damascus, to have somebody stand up and not offer a sincere opinion, but to say something so absolutely venomous and vindictive against Amir al-Mu'mineen. This was something they could not bear. So a commotion arose in the masjid, and that person, Arbad al-Fazari, he fled, and the people ran after him. And it is said that in that commotion, in that fitna, he was killed. He was attacked, perhaps he was trampled. It was a severe commotion. News came to Amir al-Mu'mineen that that man had been killed. And the Imam, he became concerned. He said, "Who killed him?" Because even though that person had rose up to turn people against Amir al-Mu'mineen, justice was what the Imam was speaking of and calling people towards. He would not want justice to be trampled in his own masjid. He said, "Who killed him?" They said that there was a commotion. The people of various tribes, they went to pursue the man because he did deserve to be punished for what he said. He had breached the trust of the Islamic Ummah. And so it isn't known, it was an entire tribe. People came and he was killed. The Imam said that he is qatilu immiyatin. He is one who has been killed by a state of ignorance and blindness. It was a general sedition that took place. His blame cannot be pinned on a single person. But diyatuhu ala bayti mal al-muslimin. But even then, as a Muslim who was not deserving of death, his life cannot go in vain. And so the Imam said that his family, they should be compensated for his wrongful death by the public treasury of the Muslims. All of the Muslims should bear the responsibility and should compensate his family for that death. Even if the person had spoken and risen up against the Imam was still not willing to have his blood go in vain. And then it is said that some people, they spoke and they wanted to say to the Imam that, "Don't think that this is the opinion of the majority of us. We are sincere and we are following you." But the Imam, he gave a very brief few words of public address, and then it is said that he went home. And that public address the Imam gave at that time, it is instructive. Imagine the commotion. Imagine the high emotions. People had lost loved ones in the Battle of Jamal. People were volunteering their money and their very lives to go all of that distance to Siffin, to Syria at that time, in order to combat the rebellion of Muawiyah. And so when people are willing to give their lives, or when people have given their lives, we're not talking about a joke, and we're not talking about something that can be taken lightly anymore. In that commotion, look at the balance that the Imam had and the way that he did not let emotion get the better of him or his followers. He said, "الطريق مشترك والناس في الحق سواء." The path that we are taking, it is a joint path. It is not something that I can say, me and my followers, we're going to take one path, and everybody else, they're going to take another path. We are all in the city of Kufa. We are all in the Islamic land and in this society together. I am not alone, and my followers are not alone. الطريق مشترك. All of us are in this together. وَالنَّاسُ فِي الْحَقِّ سَوَاء. And all people have the same rights to speak out, to give their opinion, to say what they think. There is a responsibility. وَمَنْ اجْتَهَدَ رَأْيَهُ فِي نَصِيحَةِ الْعَامَّةِ فَلَهُ مَا نَوَى وَقَدْ قَضَى مَا عَلَيْهِ. And so if a person, if he gives his full effort and he strives to be sincere to the generality of the Muslims, to the public, فَلَهُ مَا نَوَى وَقَدْ قَضَى مَا عَلَيْهِ. He has fulfilled his responsibility and he will get whatever he intended. Allah knows what he intended, whether it was good or whether it was evil. And he has fulfilled his responsibility. And so the Imam was giving two lessons. One to those who may have gotten emotional and gotten carried away, that if somebody is giving a sincere opinion, then we shouldn't silence them because it's not what we like to hear. Because it's not what we think or what we know to be the truth. Even if I know for a fact that what I am saying is true and what this person is saying is wrong, النَّاسُ فِي الْحَقِّ سَوَاءٌ. That person and I, we both have a right. And so, if a person is offering sincere advice, then we should respect them and we should let them be heard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge opinions and He will judge intentions in accordance with His infinite knowledge. But the Imam is also giving another lesson and saying that don't think then that you are off the hook and everybody can express every opinion and that there is absolutely no responsibility that exists in society. وَمَنِ اجْتَهَدَ رَأْيَهُ فِي نَصِيحَةِ الْأُمَّةِ. A person has to give their full effort and energy to be sincere to the Amma, to the public. Sometimes we want to say something because we have an opinion, but we give vent to rumors. We say things or we quote things that we think may be true, but we haven't fully made sure that they are true. And that is not something that we have a right to do. We have to make sure that if we are speaking in the public domain and we are carrying the public trust, that we have to make all of our possible efforts to ensure that what we say, it is proper and it is correct. And then the Imam stood up, he came out of the minbar, and he went back to his house to let things calm down. The Imam is trying to raise an army. The Imam is trying to motivate people to do what is right. But at the same time, he is trying to moderate their emotions and to make sure that their energies, they are only going to be spent where it is profitable and where it is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, those who may wish ill to the general body of the Muslims, the Imam is trying to make sure that they are not able to have an influence and have an effect on the Muslims. Another incident that I think it is instructive for us to think about is to remember what is quoted in Nahj al-Balagha, where in the Battle of Siffin, the Imam passed by a group of his companions and they were bad-mouthing the people of Syria and cursing them, saying all sorts of bad things. And these are people that they were fighting. People who had tried to cut off water from them. People who had tried to kill them. And it is only natural that if somebody says something evil to me, then I will say 10 things evil to them. Let alone if they have tried to kill me and tried to kill my family and tried to cut off water so that I will die of thirst in the desert. It is only natural that I will then say many bad things and do many bad things to them. The Imam said that while we are fighting them and we are going to strive to uproot their evil, but inni akrahu lakum an takunu sabbabi. Verily, I dislike for you to be people who allow ill words to come to your mouths. You may be fighting them in the battlefield. Tomorrow you may be trying to kill them. But that is because there is no other way to establish the right and truth and justice in the world other than opposing them. But inni yakrahu lakum an takunu sabbabin. That doesn't mean that I want you to speak ill of them and to talk in an unworthy way. This is something which the Imam wanted to move them away from, and then he said, لَكِنَّكُمْ لَوْ وَصَفْتُمْ أَعْمَالَهُمْ وَذَكَرْتُمْ حَالَهُمْ. If you were able to describe what they say and tell people, mention what they do, لَكَانَ أَصْوَبَ فِي الْقَوْلِ وَأَبْلَغَ فِي الْعُذْرِ. That would be more proper in speech and more absolutely worthy in ensuring that nobody could object to what you have said. You will have an udhr and you will have a proper justification for what you have said. So the Imam said that this is how you should speak. And then if you want to pray, وَقُلْتُمْ مَكَانَ سَبِّكُمْ إِيَّاهُمْ. If you want to pray, then don't pray, oh Allah, curse them, obliterate them, destroy their country, make their wells dry and their trees barren and all of their lands desert. But say, if you were to say, وَلَوْ قُلْتُمْ مَكَانَ سَبِّكُمْ إِيَّاهُمْ اللهم احقن دماءنا ودماءهم واصلح ذات بيننا وبينهم واهدهم من ضلالتهم حتى يعرف الحق من جهله ويروي عن الغي والعدوان من لهج به. If you had said, "Oh Allah, protect and ensure the safety of our lives as well as their lives, and rectify what has gone wrong among our relations. Guide them from their deviation, so that whoever was ignorant of the truth may come to know the truth, and whoever was misled, they may come back to the right path. Whoever was enamored of deviation, they may now become enamored of truth." So this is the prayer that the Imam tells his army to make for those they are fighting. Now, one point that I would like to make is that this doesn't mean that the Imam said pray for everybody and it's always better to pray for somebody than ever to pray against. The Imam, he did also pray against and imprecate and condemn certain people. The Imam, he was not averse to ever saying la'an. In fact, sometimes people think that it was the conduct of Muawiyah that he started to speak ill of and condemn Amir al-Mu'mineen and Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein from the pulpit. We all know that this was the sunnah and the seerah of Muawiyah, which continued with Bani Umayyah until the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz in about the year 99 after Hijrah. But it wasn't Muawiyah who started that. He had begun bad-mouthing Amir al-Mu'mineen. But believe it or not, it was Amir al-Mu'mineen who began in his qunut, in his prayers, and according to some narrations, after his salat, cursing Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari and Mughirah ibn Shu'bah and some of the other heads of kufr and nifaq, of unbelief and hypocrisy. This is what the Imam would do in his prayer. And in fact, the Imam didn't innovate that practice. It was what the Prophet used to do in his own prayers, when he would pray against and imprecate against the unbelievers. And many Muslims, they have forgotten this history of the Prophet. But we see signs of it even in today's Muslim community in our practice. There are many Muslims who have forgotten the beauty of recitation of qunut in the prayer. Their salat, it either is completely devoid of qunut, or they only have qunut in some prayers, at some times, or only in fajr, or only in witr, or some prayers. The reason why they have lost qunut is because there is that memory that it was in the qunut that the Prophet would curse the heads of unbelief and shirk in his own day. And that is not a memory that they would want to preserve. We have many ahadith attributed to the Prophet falsely, that the Prophet said that, "Oh Allah, whoever I cursed or spoke ill of, turn that curse into rahmah and blessings and barakah for them." As if the Prophet, na'udhu billah, would say something incorrect, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have to go as an editor and say, "Well, that wasn't, oh Allah cursed them, that was, oh Allah blessed them." Now, where did those ahadith come from? The fact that they are forged does not require us to go and look at the chain of transmission. The very fact that they attribute such blasphemy to the Prophet is sufficient for us to know that they are false and they are forged by the enemies of Islam. But where did it come from? Because the Prophet did used to curse certain people, and he did used to condemn certain people. And therefore, when they would do that, they had no way to respond to it except saying, well, maybe he didn't mean to say something bad, maybe he meant to say something good. So the point I am trying to make, and the balance we have to achieve, is to realize the extent to which the Imam would ensure that people were not bad-mouthing, cursing, praying against, and drawing lines in the sand against those who may yet turn to the truth. But at the same time, when it was clear that somebody was wrong, and was not only dhal, but was mudil. Not only were they deviated and astray themselves, but they were trying to make people go astray. That is when the Imam would take a firm stand. And that firm stand would be in word and with deed. So those who are followers of the Imam, we should not be afraid to take a firm stand and speak out against the heads and the sources of injustice. if sometimes we have believers, if sometimes we have the need to speak out against injustice and somebody speaks out, unfortunately I have seen some people sometimes say that, well, they are following the sunnah of Muawiyah. No. Simply saying something harsh or criticizing or even condemning somebody, that is not automatically the sunnah of Muawiyah. It is the sunnah of Allah in the Quran. It is the sunnah of the Prophet throughout his life and the sunnah of Amir al-Mu'mineen if the person being cursed is deserving of a public condemnation. And it is the sunnah of Muawiyah if you are cursing somebody who deserves to be praised or does not yet deserve to be cursed. Amir al-Mu'mineen was always brought that advice by people close to him and others, that why don't you temporarily leave Muawiyah be? Take care of your own affairs, and then when you are strong, you can go and obliterate him. And the Imam replied, مَا كُنْتُ مُتَّخِذَ الْمُضِلِّينَ عَضُدًا. I will not take those who misguide people as a supporter, even for a moment. And so the Imam, he took a clear stand where it needs to be taken. But at the same time, the Imam did not want that enmity, that animosity, and those divisions to become public and remain among the Muslims. And that is a lesson, and that is the balance that we have to take. We shouldn't look at the superficial aspect of actions, but look at the philosophy and the depth behind those actions, and understand where it is that we need to take a stand, and where it is that we need to show forgiveness, kindness, compassion, and even let certain things go. When is it that we should condemn, and when is it that we should maintain our silence and pray for Allah to make things better? If we can understand when to pray for what, and when to say what, and when to do what, that is when we will be able to say that we are gaining the inspiration of the conduct and the character of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam. That was his life struggle. And he engaged in that struggle for as long as he lived until he was martyred. And we have in the ahadith that the Prophet said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, there were two people who were the most wretched in all of human history. And this is in terms of their personal wretchery and shaqawa. أشقى الأولين ناقر ناقة صالح. The first of the wretched people in history was the one who killed that miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, as described in Surah Shams, in order to guide the people of Prophet Salih. This was not something which was causing them any harm. It was simply a miracle, a blessing Allah had sent, so that people would be able to tell truth from falsehood. And a person came and killed that she-camel because he did not want Allah's guidance to reach his people. That was the height of wretchery. That was the height of wretchedness. وَأَشْقَى الْآخَرِينَ, and the أَشْقَى الْآخِرِينَ خَاضِبُ لِحْيَتِكَ يَا Ali. And the one who will color your beard with the blood of your own head, O Ali, that is the one who is the most wretched of all of humanity. It was on this night when the Ummah, it lost Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this was a loss which has never been compensated. For hundreds of years, and now for more than 1,000 years, this Ummah is still suffering the loss of Amir al-Mu'mineen. One of the companions and the lovers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Dirar al-Kinani, he once went in the company of Muawiyah, and Muawiyah said to him, I know that you were close to Imam Ali. Tell me, can you describe Amir al-Mu'mineen to me? Describe Ali ibn Abi Talib to me. And Dirar, he was in the company and in the court of the one who had fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen and had caused his death. He did not want, he wasn't afraid of his life, as his words after this will demonstrate. But he perhaps did not want to have the name of Imam Ali and his virtues mentioned in such unholy company. He said, "Awatu'fini, will you let me go?" And Muawiyah said, there is no way out. You must say what you know of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And so Dirar, he said many words about the grandeur, the glory of Amir al-Mu'mineen, how his companions thought of him. He said that he was somebody who was as if he were a spring of wisdom. Whatever he would say, whenever he would speak in the masjid, or even if it was just a few words that he would say in his own company of his companions, there would be gems of wisdom that would come from him. وَكَانَ وَاللَّهِ غَرِيزَ الدَّمْعَ طَوِيلَ الْفِكْرَةِ. and he had constant tears streaming down his face, even though he was the most pure of all human beings. And yet he would weep at his own state and at the human condition, and out of humility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, deep in thought, كَانَ وَاللَّهِ كَأَحَدِنَا يُدْنِينَا إِذَا أَتَيْنَا. He was as if he were one of us, even though he was our leader and he was ma'asum, and protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all sin and all deviation. But among us it was as if he was one of us. When we would come to him, he would call us close. وَيُجِيبُنَا إِذَا سَأَلْنَا. And he would answer us when we would call on him, as if there were no barrier and no difference and no precedence that he had over us. وَكَانَ مَعَ قُرْبِهِ مِنَّا لَا نُكَلِّمُهُ هَيْبَةً لَهُ. And even though he were so close to us, and he did not let any difference come between us, when we came to him, it was not possible for us to open our mouths and speak to him because of the awe that we held him in and the esteem that we held him in, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had illuminated his character so much. فَإِن تَبَسَّمَ فَعَنْ مِثْلِ اللُّؤْلُؤِ الْمَنْظُومِ. When he would smile in order to break down that ice and make us feel that we could approach him, it was as if we would see gems breaking from his face and within his demeanor and his countenance, and we would see the beauty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him in his demeanor and also in his iman. يُعَظِّمُ أَهْلَ الدِّينِ وَيُحِبُّ الْمَسَاكِينَ. He was one who would honor and hold in esteem all of those who were associated with and were close to the deen and the religion. Those who were sincere in the religion, he would honor them even though he was their master and their teacher. وَيُحِبُّ الْمَسَاكِينَ. And he was more comfortable in the company, and he loved those who were poor far more than those who were powerful, far more than those who had wealth and authority. لَا يَطْمَعُ الْقَوِيُّ فِي بَاطِلِهِ وَلَا يَيْأَسُ الضَّعِيفُ مِنْ عَدْلِهِ. The ones who were strong and wanted to now have contacts and get things done by bending the rules, they would not be able to think that, well, perhaps he will bend the rules for us because we have wealth and power and influence. And those who were weak, they would never lose hope that Amir al-Mu'mineen would be able to do what is right, and that he will make the right decision even if they did not have anybody to go and speak for them, and even if their voice was weak. This was Amir al-Mu'mineen. And then Dirar says that I would see Amir al-Mu'mineen time and time again at night in the masjid of Kufa standing, and he would be holding on to his beard, and he would be shaking as if he had been bitten by a snake, and he would call out, Rabbana, Rabbana, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his mercy and for his forgiveness, and praying for that ummah of the Prophet which had given him so much hardship and so much difficulty throughout his life, to the extent that at the end of his life, Amir al-Mu'mineen said, "Oh Allah, grant me your own company and take me away from this trial that you have placed me in." Dirar said that I would hear Amir al-Mu'mineen pray time and time again, min qillat az-zad wa bu'd as-safar wa khashyat at-tariq. Oh Allah, how difficult is the journey, and how few our provisions are on this journey, and how dangerous is the path that we may cross. O Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you would say these words, then how few provisions we have, and how far is our journey even to approach you and be able to see you, and how dangerous and how scary is the path that we are going to traverse, O Amir al-Mu'mineen. O Prophet, O Ahlul Bayt, we need you to take us by the hands and to bring us to your company and to bring us in your company to the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our sins and our shortcomings. Grant us the intercession and the company of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad in this life and for all eternity in the hereafter. May Allah hasten the fulfillment of His promise to the believers, the righteous, those deemed weak in the land, that truth will overcome falsehood, that justice will vanquish oppression, and that Islam will overcome all false religion and all inequity and injustice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to witness the fulfillment of that promise and to be a part of it. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.